everyone. Wow, this is so much fun. We'd hoped to do this before a live audience. Instead, we have one reporter and Patrick, our tech person. But this is Lightning Strike, the new Cork O'Connor. Actually, it's a prequel to the Cork O'Connor series by Kent Krueger. We're so pleased to see you.
Oh, I'm so pleased to be here, even under the unfortunate circumstances.
Well,
I was so hoping up until just, a very short while ago that we could do it in front of an audience. The damn Delta variant.
yes. Well, we'll just have to make the best of it.
Okay.
And
I like talking with you, even if it's just with you. This is always a pleasure.
thank you, Mr. Krueger. We've actually been doing this since Iron Lake, your very first book. We've not missed a single book.
It's so long ago, Barbara, I can't recall it.
Oh, it's a lot of books ago.
It's a lot of
right?
books ago.
Well, you published Iron Lake the same year that Steve Hamilton published his first book, and it's been wonderful because both of you have continued to bring their books to the Poison Pen and the Poison Pen audience. So what I wanted to do, because we had so many conversations, I want to introduce some new material tonight. I'm going to show you for the camera. This is the New York Times book review, and there is, you'll recognize from the artist's sketch, without the cap. There is this wonderful interview with Kent Krueger. It's a feature that the New York Times Book Review runs called By the Book, and it's a real honor to be an author included in it. So what was your reaction when they said, I assume they emailed you or called you and said they wanted to do this piece?
Yeah, I got a call from my publisher and I went, woohoo! I mean, who wouldn't? It was a complete surprise and a huge honor and a tremendous responsibility. I mean, it's going to be in the New York Times. You better say something that's really memorable.
In other words, you didn't want to sound like a complete ass when you responded. Right?
Like I usually do.
No, you don't. But I really did. So I've learned some things about you I never knew before. For example, Kent doesn't read in bed. I didn't think there was a living person who didn't read in bed, but you are the exception. When do you read?
Usually in the afternoon, because if I read in bed, like in 5 minutes, I'm ready to go to sleep. And as I said in the article, I find myself reading the same page again and again, night after night, trying to get in. It's just, it's not for me. It's not, I go to sleep. That's what you do when you go to bed. Well, that's one of the things you do when you go to bed.
I hope it's more than that. Well, see,
but I read in the afternoon when I have more energy and I'm more
Right.
awake, and so I can spend a long time with a book. Really get into it.
I have a lifetime history of reading myself to sleep. In fact, I don't think I can actually go to sleep if I don't read myself to sleep. And at one point in my life, when I'd had surgery gone wrong and I was on serious medication, and I said to them one day, I want to go off this stuff, and they said, no, it'll be too hard on you, and you need to stay on it. And I said, no, I want to go off it. And they said, why? And I said, because I can't read. I'm so doped up, I can't read. I would rather use books as my narcotic than real narcotics, and so they let me do it. They were right, it was a really dumb thing to do, but nonetheless, once I got past the detox, it was right for me.
But I got to tell you, as a writer, if you told me that my books put you to sleep every night, I wouldn't consider that a compliment.
No, I didn't mean it. They were soporific. It's just that's that. Well, let's go on. All right. Are there any classic novels you've only recently read for the first time? And I'll bet this answer would apply, not your answer, but that question would apply to many people during the pandemic.
What was my answer?
What was your answer?
The Reavers?
Well, here I learned that you've led a book group for your church community for many years. And it's William Faulkner's The Reavers,
The Reavers,
right?
yeah. Which is, I'm not sure if that was the book that was cited when Faulkner won the Nobel Prize, but it won the Pulitzer Prize the year it came out. And it's one of his lesser known works. I don't think a lot of people, if you said William Faulkner's The Reavers, they would go, huh? As I lay dying, Absalom, but The Reavers. And I lead the book group, and I recommended, what the deal was is we had chosen last year to read a novel by every American Nobel Prize winner in literature. And when it came time to choose a book for Faulkner, anybody out there who's tried to read Faulkner without taking a class in Faulkner, you understand it can be a very challenging prospect reading a Faulkner novel. So I suggested The Reivers because I knew it was one of the more approachable, and I knew it was picaresque in its in the story that it told, and I just thought maybe this, and it turned out to be the favorite read across all of our Nobel Prize winning authors of the book group, and I was just so impressed with how human it was and how accessible it was, and how often I laughed at a Faulkner novel.
I'm astonished.
So you should read it.
I will do that. I will definitely do that because I haven't read Faulkner. Did you have anyone to guide you through reading Faulkner when you were a younger reader?
Yes, I was talking to Patrick, who's behind the camera at the moment, and we were talking about the fact that Moby Dick is not a novel I've been able to ever finish, despite the many times I've tried it, and it's one of Patrick's favorite novels. And Patrick explained that he had somebody very knowledgeable in college who guided the class through Moby Dick, pointing out all of the wonderful aspects of it. I had that with Faulkner, and so I have learned how to appreciate Faulkner, despite the density of the manner in which he tells a story. So my suggestion for The Reivers, it was one of the Faulkners that I had never read, but knew about. And so it was a discovery for me.
Was Faulkner an influence on you, even if you hadn't read his entire oeuvre?
Not in the least.
Okay. So who has been, digressing from the New York Times, who were major literary influences for you?
Well, I tried, my father was a high school English teacher, and when I was 18 years old, he insisted I read Ernest Hemingway. And I fell in love with Hemingway and tried for a very long time to write the great American novel as Ernest Hemingway might have written it. Stupid on so many levels. But I outgrew Faulkner, I outgrew Hemingway, and I grew into Steinbeck. And Steinbeck continues to influence my writing in this respect. Steinbeck does two things that I really admire in his writing. One, he has great compassion for the underdog, for people who are struggling in the world. And I mean, we're in such a place right now that I think we all should read some Steinbeck so that we open our hearts to the people who among us who are really struggling in life. And the other thing that Faulkner does is the other thing that Steinbeck does is he gives the reader such a profound sense of place. When I read a Steinbeck novel that's set in the Salinas Valley, particularly, I can see his heart in every line. And when I write a story set in Minnesota, that's really what I'm trying to give the reader, an understanding of how much I love this place that I'm writing about.
So Cannery Row, Grapes of Wrath, those kinds of books.
Exactly.
Because it's certainly true. In fact, most of your books are actually named for geographical places in Minnesota and in the Midwest. I did like your comment very much. Where is it in here? About the Midwest. There it is. You were talking about what genres do you especially enjoy reading, and you say I'm drawn to crime fiction, but there are a lot of subgenres in that broad category, and some of them I prefer over others. When I'm reading outside the crime genre, I gravitate towards novels set in the Midwest. So what is it that's distinctive, do you think, about a Midwest novel and a Midwest voice? I mean, I'm from Chicago,
Sure.
You're from Minnesota. What
Sure.
is it that you think of as a Midwestern novel?
Well, first of all, they're accessible.
Okay.
And they're accessible because they are spare in their language, but eloquent in what they convey. In some ways, it's sort of like a poem. And I think that those of us who write about the Midwest and write out of a deep love of the Midwest understand that so much of our work is about the connection that we have with the land that we occupy. In the Midwest, we take great pride in believing that we shape the land, but the truth is the land also shapes us. And so much of what we write about comes out of that connectedness with the land. As I point out in the article, Marilyn Robinson and her novel Gilead, which is one of my all-time favorites, I think is a good example of that. Or if you read the poetry of Ted Krueger, it's simple language, and yet it conveys such depth of emotion and meaning. And I think that's classic Midwest.
I've always thought it was interesting that there are so many more crime writers in Minnesota writing about Minnesota than Chicago. Chicago really, for a major city, has a surprisingly low number of crime writers.
I think there are probably more than you know.
Maybe more have come up.
Yeah, they often fly under the radar, I think. I don't think that they are well enough known. But there are lots of, because I belong to the Midwest chapter of Mystery Writers of America.
So
I know a lot of work that are being out. Well, you've got Libby Fisher-Hellman.
Okay.
Back in the old days, you had, oh gosh, now you put me on the block and my brain is frozen.
I can do Sarah Paretsky, I can do Michael Harvey, who I think is a wonderful writer. He doesn't write that often, but I think his books are just amazing.
But
then I kind of stall.
Well, I think if you're looking at Minnesota, and particularly the Twin Cities, the fact that we have so many fine crime writers there is simply a function of the fact that we have so many fine writers there, which is a function of the fact that we have so many fine artists in every medium working in the Twin Cities. Minnesota, a long time ago, chose to support the arts.
Right.
And so we have lots of grants, lots of ways in which, as a people and as a government, we support the arts. And people gravitate there because of that. There's an incredibly creative atmosphere in the Twin Cities because of that. So the fact that we have lots of people who write fine crime novels is a result of all of this other support for the arts that the people of Minnesota give us.
That's a really nice tribute to your state.
I love Minnesota.
Yes, I know you do, and how it functions. Okay, so here's the obvious question. Who's your favorite fictional detective, and who is the best villain?
Oh, well, that was a piece of cake.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Sherlock Holmes is so classic. He is so classic. And as I said in the article, is there a more mysterious and nefarious villain than Moriarty? And how many other writers have taken those two characters and riffed off them, you know?
Oh, listen, it's an ongoing thing. There are always new people who are writing either what we call pastiche, which are sort of a continuation of the Holmes canon, or using it as a template for much more adventurous and creative Sherlock Holmes things. You know, I mean, I absolutely loved one episode of the TV series. I don't know if you remember it, but with Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yeah.
And at one point, I can't remember what it is that is going on, but he has a medical thing going on, and he says it's a 3-patch problem. And only if you know Holmes would you recognize, that this is a wonderful variant on a 3-pipe problem.
Oh.
And, I mean, you have to really.
Over my head, I missed it.
No, it was. That's the one thing that really sticks in my mind from the Benedict Cumberbatch Sherlock Holmes is that glorious moment where it's a 3-patch. I think they're nicotine patches. I think he's trying to quiz. But anyway, it's a 3-patch problem, and I thought, so. You can appreciate Holmes without ever knowing why that was funny, but if you read it and all, then you understand why it is funny.
So, Conan Doyle occupies kind of a special place for me, as I have told audiences many times. Those of you watching, you may have heard this before, but I really was turned on as a reader when I was 12 years old, for reasons I won't go into, by a librarian. And so here's the story. I was a Boy Scout, wanted to get my reading merit badge. I had to volunteer at the library to get the merit badge. Went to the library to do my duty. They put me to work date stamping the returned books. That's what I did for about an hour. And then the librarian walks my way and asks me a very librarian-esque question. She said, "Kent, what do you like to read?" Well, the truth is I like to read comic books at that point, but I didn't want to tell her that. So I told her the truth anyway, and she said to me, "Have you ever read the Count of Monte Cristo?" So she turned me on to Dumas, and when I read everything that our library had by Dumas, I asked her, what should I read next? And the next guy she recommended to me was Arthur Conan Doyle.
Oh.
And I fell in love with Sherlock Holmes, and then it was H.G. Wells, and it was Jules Verne, and it was Jack London and Robert Louis Stevenson. So these are the guys that really first turned me on to understanding the true power of a great story as, you know, a 12-year-old kid. And Conan Doyle was right there in the mix.
Well, you certainly do understand the power of a great story, and how wonderful that at such a formative age, when that kind of stuff really influences you and sticks with you, that you had somebody to guide you to those particular books. So I have one more thing to ask you before we turn to Lightning Strike, because I particularly like this. This is a question, these are sort of standard questions for this article that they do in the Times. You're organizing a literary dinner party. Which 3 writers do you invite? You've already named 2, Hemingway and Faulkner, but I love your third answer. Do you remember it, or do you want me to read it?
Emily Dickinson.
Yeah, but why?
Emily Dickinson, because I would love to know what it's like to spend your life writing and become famous only after you were dead.
Well, you know, there's a whole thing going around.
I could ask the same thing of Van Gogh, I guess.
Well,
you know?
I was just going to say, there's a whole exhibit going around about Van Gogh, and you know, I've been to the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. We had another exhibit, Immersive Van Gogh, at the Science Museum here. And I mean, it's practically a religion. And yet, you know, the poor man was never able to achieve any kind of success. And, you know, it's a tragic life story. And his brother, who tried to support him, only outlived him by a few months.
Yeah.
You know, so it really became his...
And it was Theo's wife
Exactly.
who made Van Gogh famous.
That's right. Yeah, she really did. And, you know, which goes to show that you do need a curator. You do need a custodian of your work and somebody that can promote it. Because there are probably artists and writers who leave us and nobody does that for them, and so we never really recognize them. I mean, that's true of musicians,
Yep.
too. I mean, Carmen was a complete flop when Bizet premiered it, and you know, it's turned into one of the most popular operas of all time. So, but he got to see that. But you're right, how terrible. Van Gogh never got to be famous, and
On the other hand,
yes,
one of the things that I believe truly as a writer is, you don't write to be famous. You write to satisfy a need that comes from inside you. And if you become famous and people, you know your work, that's wonderful. But that's not why you do what you do. And I'd love to hear that from Emily Dickinson. I'm sure if she were here today, she would tell you the same thing.
well, here we have Kent, who actually writes for himself, but has also become famous and won awards. I presented one to you, I can still remember, at Left
Yep.
Coast Crime, but you've won all the major mystery awards, and so that must be very satisfying. Just to know that other people love your work, regardless of whether it means celebrity or money.
Well, it's wonderful to have that kind of confirmation.
Yeah.
The problem I have with any of this is that these are all arbitrary measures of success, arbitrary gauges, and the bar that's set is set by other people. And I would just love for us to get to as writers to get to the point where that's not what's important. But it is surely nice when you get recognized.
Well, it really is, and if you want to continue...
I won't deny that.
No, and if you want to continue to be published, it's good to have an upward arc so that your publisher is...
Well, your publisher certainly likes it when you win awards or hit the New York
Um,
Times bestseller list.
Absolutely true. So, a year or two ago, must have been 2 years ago, I got an email from Ken asking if I would look at a manuscript that he'd been working on. And I said, of course I would, and so it arrived. And it was the manuscript for This Tender Land. And one of the questions for you was, or the question that you were asking me was, would people expect this to be a sort of sequel to Ordinary Grace, or how, because that's what you were supposed to be writing,
Yeah.
but you went off course there. And we had a good discussion about it, and in the end, of course, This Tender Land published as its own book and not as...
But you remember what you advised me to do?
Yeah?
It was such a wonderful piece of advice. You advised me to write a letter to the booksellers and explain exactly to them what I had explained to you. And that's what I did. And it made all the difference. Maybe not all the difference in the world, but it was certainly very helpful because booksellers understood and got behind it.
They did, and I think it's important to, if people had a set of expectations and then you're giving them a different book, story, whatever it is, it's good to kind of explain it. But I brought that up because I do think that those two books have had a huge influence on Lightning Strike, both in your wanting to write it
Mm-hmm.
and the way you wrote it, because this again is really a novel about a father and his son. So if I'm right, tell me if I'm right, and then tell us about Lightning Strike.
Yeah, there are certainly similarities, and you can see the influences of both Ordinary Grace and This Tender Land in Lightning Strike. The most obvious influence is the fact that they're all essentially stories told from an adolescent male perspective.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Ordinary Grace and This Tender Land, the narrators, the first-person narrators, are those young voices. In Lightning Strike, it's a third-person narrative, but it's about Cork when he is 12 years old. I have to be honest with you, I wrote this novel at the urging of my agent, who for years has been encouraging me to go back and tell the story of Cork and his father particularly, because so often across the course of this series I have related incidents, Cork has related incidents about things that occurred with his father, the relationship he had with his father, but I've never explored it in depth. It has clearly been a complicated relationship, I knew that all along, but this was an opportunity to go back and finally explore that relationship in depth. I don't know what women's relationships are with their mothers, but men have a very complicated relationship with fathers. And maybe it's the same in that.
Trust me, it's the same.
Okay, I see it from a male perspective. Fathers have and I know this from a father's perspective as well as a son's. Fathers have a duty, feel they have a duty to prepare their sons for the world. And sometimes the way in which they go about it can seem callous. And it's hard for a son to get beyond that sometimes iron front, because there's a huge heart always usually behind it. It's hard for a son to get beyond that solid front. And this is the story of Cork encountering that and trying to understand what's going on. It's really he's beginning to understand the world is not as he has seen it, and people are not as he has seen them, and it's confusing, as it is for all of us as we try to understand our relationships with our parents, and then our relationships with our family, and beyond that, our relationships with the community and our relationship with the world, which is essentially what Cork is going through in Lightning Strike.
Well, I think when he's, you have a scene where he's on his bicycle delivering papers.
Which I did as a kid.
And yes, I could tell that you wrote it from the heart, right? And I think that you illustrated that whole thing about him, out in before dawn, delivering his newspapers, thinking that he sees his community, but gradually recognizing that what he's seeing at that hour and by himself is not the whole thing. But another theme that you've explored, I mean, you did write a really dramatic book. Is it Red Knife? I always forget the
Red
title.
Knife.
Thank you. About the reservations, the Native American reservation in Minnesota, and how bleak and difficult life has been there. But in this book, you also remind us that that Cork has a mixed heritage, because his grandmother, right, is Anishinaabe.
She's a true blood Iron Lake Anishinaabe.
Right. And so that has pluses, but it also leads to minuses in the community. I mean, he's looked at as something, it's not really a half-breed, but, a mixed breed anyway, which doesn't mean that everybody accepts that well.
Yeah, particularly back in those days,
Mm-hmm.
if you had any native blood in you at all, there are a lot of people who looked at you as tainted.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you had Native heritage, it was not necessarily something that you broadcast. And a lot of people tried to hide it, or were even unaware of it because their families didn't talk about it. Cork, because his grandmother is true blood Ojibwe, has always been kind of proud of that. And he only is becoming aware of the fact that people in the community look at him differently because of that. Look at his mother differently because of that. Look at the marriage between his mother and his father differently because of that. That's something he's never really been conscious of before. But in this summer, because of the events that occur in Lightning Strike, he begins to understand that. And now he has to figure out, what do I do with this?
Well, because we have read Cork's mature life, and we know that Henry Malou has played a part in it. We know, we've read Red Knife, we know about what happened there. We know that Cork has a love interest that, again, is... So it's interesting to see him just gradually becoming aware that that mixed marriages, mixed relationships are not the norm, and that some people will look down on that or resent it, or some people will celebrate it. We've come a long way since he was a child, but maybe not as far as we could come.
Yeah, if you know, across the course of the series, Cork is always struggling with the realization that he's not quite white enough for the whites,
Right.
nor Ojibwe enough for the Ojibwe, and he's trying to figure out how to walk that difficult path.
Indeed, which is also a problem for his kids.
Mm-hmm.
So it's fascinating. We also know that Cork's father, who was the sheriff, died young, and died in office, and so that's the one thing about this book I found so sad, is that I know that Liam is not going to survive this book.
Yeah.
Now, it's not a spoiler because
it's right up front.
We know that from having read all the other books.
If you remember that, having read all the other books, yeah.
Well, it came up in Iron Lake, and Oh, sorry, I read all your books in real time as you've written them, so I always knew this. And then we also get to see Henry Malou, who's such a wonderful character. He's a much younger man. He's 50 years younger, roughly, in this book. And one of the joys of the series has been Henry, and those of us who read it are always hoping that Henry will live to be some, total
ridiculously old,
right, some
age.
Centenarian, so it's fun to see him when he's a much younger man, and his age isn't actually important in this book.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun writing Henry Malou as a young man. I had a lot of fun writing, for those of you who know the series, that Cork runs a burger joint called Sam's Place that was given to him by the Ojibwe friend of his father, Sam Wintermoon. And in most of the series, Sam is dead, but in Lightning Strike, he's alive and a very influential person in Cork's life.
He is. He's flipping burgers, and his burger place is only open it closes in the winter.
Right.
Obviously,
As most burger joints do in the North Country, or many resort businesses.
So you also, I was never entirely clear about what body of water is where, because, having grown up in Chicago, for me, all serious water is east. It totally confused me when I was an undergraduate at Stanford. I never could get the Pacific Ocean on the right side. Well, part of it was the bay, because,
You've got water on both sides.
I know, but it's an orientation that that you stick with. For me, east is water and north is and I'm sure that if I'd grown up somewhere else, I'd have a different geographic. But in Aurora, the lake is not Lake Superior, and for some reason I've always just kind of assumed it was. But in fact, this is a freshwater lake that is not Lake Superior. So where is it?
Iron Lake is very like a number of North Minnesota lakes, freshwater lakes, but Lake Superior is also freshwater.
Yes.
It's just an enormous body of
Yes,
freshwater.
and very deep.
And I have never been very specific about the location of Iron Lake and Aurora. nor really the whole outline of Iron Lake, because I play with geography a lot in my stories, and so I never want to be tied to a geographic reality for the reader that is going to bite me in the ass at some point. Wait a minute, in book 3 you said this.
Right.
So I'm always a little vague about that. But what I try to do is give a sense of the kind of lake that exists in the North Country of Minnesota, so that anybody who's been up there understands how clear that water is, how cold that water is, what that water looks like when the moon is shining on it, what we call an aqualoon is coming across it, or in the sun when it's all diamonds, you know. That's what I try to give a sense of.
Well, I was particularly struck by, there's a moment in which it's clear that Sam's place is on the lake. It's not right in downtown Aurora. It is over
It's
on
at the
lake.
edge of town,
Right,
right on the lake.
on the lake. And so then it occurred to me that I had to think seriously about the
You
lake.
just
And
needed
is
to
the lake
shrink your
east?
thinking of lakes.
Well, and so I'm still stuck there looking north, and the lake should be east, but maybe for all I know, the lake is over here on the west, if I'm facing north. So you don't even want to give me the compass point.
Well, let's not even do that.
Okay.
Although, for those of you who read the book, Iron Lake is east of Aurora and Sam's Place.
Haha. Yay.
But it runs north and south along there as well.
So my sister went to camp in Minnesota, and I
Oh, yeah?
can remember, Hackensack.
Oh,
Minnesota.
Hackensack, Minnesota, sure.
There you are. And I remember going up there and being so impressed that we could hop over the headwater of the Mississippi.
Yeah.
It's just like a little hop across, and I knew the Mississippi from much mightier body of water. My new goal is to take the Mississippi cruise from St. Paul to New Orleans. I've been on like every other major river except the Amazon. I don't know how I missed the Amazon. I mean, seriously.
I think that sounds like a fun trip, too.
Well, and I'm just so interested, and and they've opened up navigation on the Ohio and the Cumberland. There's a whole kind of river paddle wheel thing going on, which was exclusive to Europe for a long time. And also in Russia, I've been down the Irrawaddy in Burma, down the Mekong, whatever. And I thought, why haven't I done the Mississippi? So next year, BoucherCon, the big convention, if it can be live, it's going to be in the Twin Cities, right? And so I'm going to coordinate, just warning you now, Patrick, I'm going to be gone for a while. I'm going to coordinate going to BoucherCon and then stepping on a boat and going down the big river. And in fact, I think I can't remember if it's the Smithsonian or National Geographic, it might be the Smithsonian, did a 3-part wonderful TV documentary that starts in St. Paul and goes to New Orleans, and it's wonderful, but it's still not the same as actually being there.
I got to tell you this story. My daughter is an avid canoeist, and she's often done the Mississippi. And she went through, there's the first lock on the Mississippi River is there in the Twin Cities. And she was talking to the guy who ran the lock. And she was saying, boy, you must see a lot of us in canoes coming down the river. And he said, yeah. He said, the other day I had one of the most unusual guys come through. He came through in a canoe with all of his, looked like worldly goods, and his dog. And I asked him where he's going. He said, I'm going all the way down to New Orleans. And the guy said, oh, how long is that going to take you? And the guy in the canoe said, who the hell cares?
Wonderful.
Yeah,
What a great
exactly.
answer. Well, unfortunately, if I'm taking paddle boat,
You
I
care.
I don't get to screw around
She'll
with
come
it.
back someday, Patrick.
Right, don't get to screw around with it. You know what I miss the most about the Midwest is the fall.
Yeah.
I mean, really, October is the month. If you grew up in the Midwest, it is the most beautiful month. It's not yet winter and gray and muddy and all the rest of it. And summer, because summer could be amazingly hot and humid. But you've got that gorgeous month where the trees are turning and the weather is interesting. And I really miss that. I mean, I love Scottsdale, but we don't really have seasons.
One of the things that I've always tried to do with the Cork O'Connor series is try to set the stories in different seasons. Because in truth, every season, I think, in the North Country and the Midwest has a particular kind of beauty associated with it. The fall is certainly the explosion of colors, but to go out on a night when it's just snowed and the moon is up there and the snow is all sparkly and it's like you have this quiet world to yourself. There's such beauty there. In the spring when you smell that wet earth with all of the growing things now finally coming up, there's beauty there. The summers, boy, you're in the lake in the summers and you're on the rivers in the summer. So there's something beautiful in every season. And I try to show that in the course of the stories.
Not too often in November.
November is the worst
tends
month
to-
anywhere.
Often followed by March, but you know, it's those transitional seasons where it's gray
Yeah.
and it's and there's nothing on the trees and nothing is growing and it's just, you know, kind of bleak. But nonetheless, I'm excited at the thought of going down the Mississippi
Oh, you're going to have a
in the
ball, I'm
fall,
sure.
which
Yeah.
will be wonderful.
Is Rob going with you?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
good.
yeah, we're going to do that. Another thought is that you often, well, actually, you really love to, I don't want to say often, frequently, you like to set up impossible crimes in the sense that you like to set up a crime that appears to be one thing and then turns out to be another. And we're not going to do any spoilers here, but you set yourself a fairly high bar here with a death that appears to be one thing, and then the question is, was it? And, you know, you seem to delight in that. I mean, you know, remember the book, well, of course you remember, where Cork's wife disappears and all. That was a really testing book for all of us. It's hard to read it. Was it hard to write it?
You know,
Can't remember. It was
no,
so
I
long
do
ago.
remember. I wish I could say it was hard to write.
Oh. Oh!
It was simply what the story demanded, so I wrote what the story demanded.
Well, it was a tough book for readers.
I still get readers who haven't forgiven me for that book.
Well, no, it wasn't a question for giving you. It was just really hard to read it. But I think you set yourself a fairly high bar, you know, by setting up a situation, and then if that isn't the real situation, how do we get to what it really is? And that's a lot of what this story is about.
Yeah, you know, that's exactly what I set out to do. I wanted to create a situation that would appear one way but was in truth another. And how it appeared depended upon the perspective from which you were viewing it. And because we have a situation in northern Minnesota where you have a significant white population and a significant native population, they see what's happened in two different ways. They each have a way of looking at it. And that's what I wanted to get at.
Well, I think you did it extremely well. You know, I mean, I always assume that it isn't what it appears to be when I'm reading one of your books. You never take it on faith. But
I think in any good mystery, it's never what it appears to be.
That's definitely true. I mean, I find myself writing reviews. It appears to be suicide. You know, you have to get in the waffle word there, and it doesn't deny, you know, that it could be a suicide, but then perhaps not. And, you know, often find one of the hardest things about talking about books early and reviewing books early is you can't really talk about.
You don't want to give anything away.
No, but oftentimes it's how it all works out that's the thing you most want to discuss, and then you can't really do it without spoiling it for a person who hasn't yet read it. This book doesn't actually physically publish till tomorrow, so we have to be extremely careful not to say anything that will spoil your reading pleasure.
But here I am at Poison Pen the day before it actually comes out because I love Barbara.
You love the whole staff. It's
I
not just
do.
me. Not at all.
If you've never visited the Poison Pen, you need to.
But it's a challenge, you know, to try to work out what we can say about the book and give the essence of it without giving anything away. And this is a book that would be really interesting to try. So next year, when we talk about, and let me ask you, will there be another Cork O'Connor next year, or are you going to write something different?
No, I'm working on revisions to the next book in the Cork O'Connor series right now.
Oh, good.
It'll be out in the fall of 2022.
And then you're thinking about another standalone.
I have already begun work on another standalone.
Aha.
That will be a companion novel to both Ordinary Grace and This Tender Land.
A trilogy.
The Heartland Trilogy.
I love it. You know, why is it? Do you think, you know, is a 3-act structure just so common in drama that it suggests itself to writers as well, that a trilogy? I mean, I can hardly remember an author coming in here and saying, I'm writing a tetralogy. It just hardly ever comes up.
I know. I think there's something cosmic in the 3.
Do you?
Yeah. Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. I don't know, the shape of a triangle is such a solid shape, you know. I don't know, I'm coming up with all these things.
Well,
But for me, I have always envisioned it as 3 books that would deal with the same themes in the same area and all be set in earlier times. I envisioned that long ago.
actually, the Heartland Trilogy is a brilliant overall title. I
I
like that.
thought so too.
Yeah, no, I really like that. Wow, and until you write it, we don't have it, so
There you go.
have to finish that. Well, I'm cheered to hear there will be a new Cork O'Connor, and one of the other things that's wonderful about the Cork O'Connor series is that while it's Minnesota based, and Minnesota is so important to it geographically, culturally, the whole bit, you have taken him other places. For example, Arizona, down on the border, Colorado. Trying to remember where else he been.
The UP of Michigan.
Okay.
I've taken him out 3 times. Wyoming,
Wyoming. I keep
Arizona,
saying Colorado.
because
right.
it's the Rockies. Wyoming, Arizona, and the UP of Michigan. I don't leave him out there very long because readers really want him to be, you know, in 10 minutes out of Minnesota.
Yeah.
But there are reasons to take him out periodically.
Well, yeah, I think the story, can lead you to occasionally go. And now that he's not a formal lawman, but doing other stuff, he has more freedom. It's the same reason John Sanford made Lucas a U.S. Marshal.
Yeah.
So he didn't have to be in the Twin Cities, and then he didn't have to be in the Minnesota investigative, what's it called? The
Bureau of Criminal Apprehension.
Thank you. And then now can go anywhere.
Yeah.
So he's been hanging out in Louisiana and Florida and the whole bit. So, but I think it's also because John is not living in Minnesota anymore. And
Well,
it's
one
harder
of
to write about it.
one of the elements I think that readers expect in a Cork O'Connor novel is the Vocation of the Great North Woods. For a lot of readers, it's an exotic locale, and they appreciate being taken there, and I like taking them there.
Well, you do. Boundary Waters, I've always thought is that the third one?
That was the second.
Second, okay. After Iron Lake, it's Boundary Waters. And anyway, it was an area of the United States I'm not familiar with.
Yeah.
And a reminder that Minnesota is a border state. So, here in Arizona, we're always looking south, but if you're in Minnesota, you're, up until recently, was it was the longest, I think, open border in the world, and I hope we've gone back to it.
Yeah, I hope we get there again.
Me too. Patrick, do we have questions from the audience?
Yeah, we do. There are a number of questions about how should a new reader approach your work. Should they read them in order, or is it really that necessary? And that's inspired quite a discussion among your fans here.
Sure. Whenever I'm asked that question, my response is simply this. When you write a long-running series, you have to be aware that a reader might come to your work in the 12th or the 13th or the 14th novel. So every story has to be able to stand alone. It has to be satisfying within the covers of that book. It can't rely on a reader's knowledge of the history of all of the characters. However, because the Cork O'Connor series spans 15 years in the lives of the characters, it's a much richer experience in my series if you begin with the first novel, Iron Lake, and follow them in order, because you're going to see all of the growth, the development, the aging of all of the important characters in the story across time. It's just a much richer experience. For anybody who hasn't read my work, I honestly suggest beginning with Lightning Strike. I think it's a perfect introduction to the elements that you're going to find in every Cork O'Connor novel, many of the same characters you're going to find in a Cork O'Connor novel. And if you appreciate what I've done here, then I do encourage you to go to Iron Lake and begin and work through the series in order. Again, just a much richer experience.
I'm handicapped in these discussions because I read Kent in real time from Iron Lake forward, so it's hard for me, not to say that that's the best way to do it. But you're absolutely right. A prequel is in fact a good place to start. Although there are some things revealed in a prequel that might surprise you if you hadn't read the other books first.
Maybe.
Maybe, right.
Okay, this is an interesting question. Betty asks, let's see here. Have you ever discussed the American Indian culture and issues around indigenous peoples with Louise Erdrich? Have you met her?
Oh, sure, I know Louise. And no, we haven't sat down and had a significant discussion. And mostly it's because I'm intimidated by Louise. Louise is, in fact, Ojibwe. She's Anishinaabe. And if you want an authentic story, an authentic voice from the Anishinaabe perspective, you should be reading Louise Erdrich. If you want the white perspective of the Ojibwe culture, trying to be as sensitive as I can to the issues involving the Ojibwe, then I'm okay. But Louise is the real deal, and she's such a fine writer as well.
You know, I never asked you, why did you decide to incorporate the Ojibwe into the series?
Tony Hillerman. So I tried, I told you I tried for a very long time to write the great American novel as Ernest Hemingway had written it, and then I went through a midlife crisis in my 40s and thought, the hell with the great American novel, I want to write something somebody might actually want to read. I looked around me to see what people read. Everybody reads mysteries. And so I decided I was going to write a mystery. Here's a confession coming from a mystery writer. Before I began to write them, I didn't read mysteries. Yeah, I know my high school English teacher father convinced me that mysteries were the poor stepchildren of literature, so I didn't even read the Hardy Boys or Nancy Drew when I was growing up, so I had a lot to learn. And one of the first guys I stumbled across when I started to read mysteries was Tony Hillerman, who just did this amazing work with the culture of the Navajo in his stories, and I thought, well, nobody's doing that in Minnesota with the Ojibwe, maybe that's what I ought to do. So it was kind of a mercenary decision. But across time, all of these years working with the Ojibwe folks up in Minnesota, the friendships that I've established, I have just come to respect, admire the culture of the Ojibwe and the Ojibwe people. It's a rich culture, it's an ancient culture, it's a complex culture. And one of the things I admire about them most is, despite all of the crap, all of the horrific things that have been done to them and thrown at them, they haven't lost their sense of humor. They're funny people.
Really?
Yeah.
Speaking of, it just occurred to me a great band name, the Wendigo Girls. Has that ever?
No, nobody suggested that to me before, but I think I'm going to use that at some point. Thank you, Patrick.
Wendigo Girls, yeah. Let's see. Jill asks, what other Minnesota writers do you like to read, and are there any, up and coming or unknown ones that you'd like to recommend? You can think of.
Well, I'm reading an ARC by one of my good friends and really a fine writer in Minnesota, a guy named Matt Goldman. Do you know Matt's work?
Oh, Matt's been here for all his books.
Okay, Matt.
Are you kidding? His first book was so brilliant. His first book, The Crime Scene, you go to it and you discover that the perp has opened a vacuum cleaner bag and completely dusted the crime scene with the residue of the, just a brilliant end play around forensics, and he's a very funny guy too. But
And
I
he
love
writes.
his books.
Oh, he writes dialogue. I wish I could write the dialogue he writes, because he came out of writing for Seinfeld and Ellen. But I'm reading this a novel that's a standalone, Carolina Moonset, and it's just a wonderful story.
good.
So Matt Goldman, I recommend. Brian Freeman, great thriller writer. Ellen Hart, who has been writing Minnesota novels forever. Who else? Kerry Griffiths, who's new on the scene. He has a new book out called Wolf Kill. It is the coldest Minnesota book I have ever read. It's wonderful in how it evokes a true Minnesota winter. Let's see, who else? I could just, Mindy Mejia, beautiful thriller writer. Just
I'm
stunning.
glad you mentioned Brian Freeman, because I didn't think that his series set in Duluth is as well known as it could be. He's a wonderful writer. Now he's writing Ludlam, but he's doing some other things as well, and he's very prolific, but just a terrific writer.
I agree.
I'm really glad you brought him
I
up.
agree. So there are a few.
Yeah. Has there been any television or film interest in your work so far, or do you have any news in that regard?
Well, I've been dealing with Hollywood since my first novel came out. Have you ever seen my work on the big screen yet? Don't get your hopes up. There is currently a screenplay being written for a multi-episode series for Ordinary Grace. We have had significant interest from a director of note for this tender land, but I can't say any more about that. I've been in a number of meetings with producers who've wanted to turn the Cork O'Connor series into a television series. I don't know if that'll ever happen.
Do you know
So,
what may
yeah.
help you? What may help you is CJ, because I just talked to CJ Box. He's in Calgary, or was in Calgary last week, watching a filming of Joe Pickett. And, you know, there are a number of commonalities there. Wyoming, not Minnesota, you know, a character, similar, you know, many of the same issues, many of the same things. And if that's successful, it may encourage them to pick up another series.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
You know.
If my work makes it to the screen, that's okay. I'm more worried about how it's translated, you know.
Yeah.
Are they going to do a good job of it? And if I don't believe they're going to do a good job of it, I don't want it done.
You could be Sir Grafton.
There we go. I loved her integrity.
Me too. And she stuck with it right to the end.
Yeah, good for her.
How do your books do around the world? I'm sure they've been translated into lots of different languages.
Yeah, lots of different languages, and they have been a number of different kinds of receptions.
The French probably love your
Yeah.
books.
What was that?
The French, do they love them?
You know, I haven't been invited there to receive the grand prize of
Really? Because
But
they
I do
love
okay.
the American West.
I do okay in Europe. Japan has always been a big market for me. But yeah, I'm out there in more than 24 languages. I don't really track those sales probably as well as I ought to. And always the thing that I wonder about is how good is the translation? I hear from my translators often say, "Oh, I just translated this novel of yours and I loved it. I had my Japanese translator once said, 'You are a genius.' I love that translator." So I don't know.
Unless you learn Japanese, you're never going to
Exactly.
be really, you know,
Exactly.
up to date on the entire thing. Translation is a tremendous art, and you know the British Crime Writers Association gives an award to the translator, which I think is
Yeah.
really an important thing, because it does make a gigantic difference who translates from one language to another, how well they do it.
I wonder how they are able to judge how well that translation has
I
been
don't
done.
know.
Yeah.
Was that it?
Well, one question I always like to bring up, you know, your habit of writing out in coffee shops and
Uh-huh.
places like that.
Uh-huh.
Because maybe some people haven't heard that story. Are you still able to do that, or?
Yeah, for those of you who don't know what the story is all about, for the last 40 years or so, probably longer than that, I've done all my writing in coffee shops. It's just where I developed the magic of my work. Because when I really wanted to become a writer, I was the sole support of our family, and I convinced my wife, who was going to law school at the time, that if she got our kids up and dressed and off to school first thing in the morning, so that I could go to the local coffee shop 2 blocks away that opened its doors at 6 o'clock in the morning. When I came home from my job, at the end of the day, I would be the best husband, the best father you can imagine. She bought it, and so there I was every morning at the coffee shop at 6 o'clock with my pen and my notebook in hand. And so I developed all of my writing process in coffee shops, and I did that all the way up until the pandemic made us shelter in place. I still write every morning, 7 days a week. I get up at 6 o'clock, as I always have. But I've exchanged the kitchen counter for the coffee shop, and I'm married to the world's most wonderful woman. She has promised to stay in bed every morning until I finished with my writing. So that's what I've been doing. As soon as I feel like it's safe again to return to the coffee shop, I'll go back to the coffee shop, because I always loved that.
Have there been a series of different ones that you've gone to?
Yeah, the coffee shop I wrote in for more than a quarter of a century closed its doors. There would have been so my heart. It was a place called the St. Clair Broiler. And then I just transferred my loyalty to a couple of other coffee shops close to where I live now.
So do you write by hand in notebooks?
I used to. My first 8 or 9 novels were all written longhand.
Now you're, a laptop?
Yeah, you know, if you write longhand, there's that step that involves transcribing. And I was falling behind deadline on one of my novels, and I thought, gosh, if I could just do it directly to the computer, I could save some time. But that was like monkeying with the magic.
Yeah.
And I was really concerned about it, but I thought I'd give it a try, and it works. So that's how I do it now. I type directly to the laptop. But when I began writing in coffee shops, we didn't have laptops.
Right.
It was all longhand in notebooks.
Did you keep the notebooks?
I kept them for years and years and years, and then we moved, and they were all stacked up downstairs. It took me about 8 or 9 notebooks per novel, and they were just all over the place, and Diane said, "You really need to keep these." So I tossed them, so I no longer have them. I didn't know, if the Smithsonian comes calling, I don't know. No, so that's the way it stands. I do not have those notebooks anymore.
Anything else?
Just how in the world can you concentrate in a coffee shop? Somebody asks.
Yeah, I understand it sounds sort of anti-intuitive, but over all of these years, what happens in the coffee shop is everything that goes on there is white noise. It has nothing to do with me. A waitress drops a tray of dishes, big deal. It's not my responsibility.
Do fans interrupt you though?
Occasionally, actually people, at least in Minnesota, are very respectful. Sometimes, because it's pretty well known where I write, sometimes someone will come in and come over to the table and just say, "Just want to let you know I really enjoy your work," or they'll come with a book and ask me to sign it. In the old days, though, when I wrote at the Broiler, the regulars there could be kind of a problem, because these guys who were there every day would occasionally come over and sit in the booth and proceed to tell me some long, pointless story that they were sure I'd want to use in my next novel. That was the only problem. But most people are very respectful. The honest to God truth is it's a little too quiet in my home. That's why I don't write there. I've actually had this experience. I've had the house to myself, and I can still remember this day. Beautiful winter day. The sun's out. The snow's out there. It's all sparkly. I'm the only one in the house. It's exactly the kind of atmosphere you would think would be conducive to creative work. And what am I doing? I'm sitting there going, shouldn't the furnace have come on by now? I hear everything. I walk by the kitchen sink. I'm thinking, I got to wash those dishes. The phone rings. I got to answer it. There's a knock at the door. And in the coffee shop, none of that is there. None of that distraction is there. So that white noise has become very helpful and a significant part of my creative process.
It's not just the noise. It's just you're not responsible
Yeah,
for the space.
exactly.
That's really,
Exactly.
what it comes down to
Yeah.
is a lack of responsibility.
For me, it's like going to the office.
Yeah, no, I see. So I have a question for you, which is that you do some very, very long, or did, extensive book tours. I mean, wasn't it for This Tender Land? You did like a road trip for 2 months or something. Up and down the
25,000 miles.
Yeah, up and down the Mississippi, the whole bit. So do you write while you're doing that, or are you now sufficiently productive that you can take off a couple of months and still meet your deadlines?
I'm not worried about being productive. I'm worried about losing connection with the energy of whatever the project happens to be. So even when I'm on the road, I still get up at 6, even if I'm, in a hotel or wherever. I get up at 6 o'clock, I go down and I try to write for at least an hour in the hotel before I take off and catch my plane or whatever. Because I think it's important to stay connected with that energy.
I wondered because, that's a tremendous amount of time to be, and you don't find that, connecting with fans and talking to fans about this book, because this is not the book Kent's working on. He's actually a book ahead and then started another book. Do you find that interrupts your concentration in the work in progress when you have to keep stopping and talking about a book you've already completed?
No, it hasn't been a problem for me because the book I'm completed and talking about is yesterday's news to me. I've moved on.
Right, no, I know you have, whereas
Yeah.
we're all just coming into the picture. He's already exited, gone in another direction. Well, this has been,
Barbara, this has been a delight.
it's always so much fun to talk to Kent. I'm glad the New York Times gave us some new material. We're going to have to come up with some other for next time. But we've not only done your books, but we've had intervening events.
Yeah, I've dropped into the store occasionally to help with an interview with somebody, give you a little bit of a break, which I've always enjoyed.
Which has been wonderful, and we've done a couple of fundraisers
Mhm.
for the American Association of University Women, and we've had a couple of parties just for the hell of it,
Yep.
and you know, so it's been great. And in fact, as a rule, you spend some time in Arizona in the spring,
Usually every spring we spend some time in Sedona.
which
Yep.
is gorgeous.
It's gorgeous, and we're both, my wife and I, hike, and I'm not sure there's a better place to hike than the Red Rocks of Sedona.
Actually, the Red Rocks of Utah.
Are they?
If you ever go up there, yeah, I'm going to have to introduce you to Moab
Okay.
at some point. Not that
Okay.
I don't want you to be in Sedona because you're closer, but nonetheless, Moab is
I'm always
extraordinary.
looking for more places to hike.
We'll talk. Right. Anyway, thank you all for watching this evening, and let me remind you that Kent, because he's here, has actually personally autographed these books, Lightning Strike, and you don't want to miss out on it. And I will say, just as a warning note, that it's getting increasingly difficult for publishers to create print runs for books, the first print run, and they tend to sell out early, and if you're not alert, you wind up with either a wait or a later print run. It's a discussion I've had recently, and you'll see some material on our website, on our homepage, explaining all the reasons why this is true. So, while we still have books, first print run, signed, this is your moment to buy it. Thank you so much. Good night, everybody. And
Good night.
Kent.
Stay safe, stay well.